What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special. We've got new developments in Eastern Europe today as gas flow through one of Europe's most important pipelines slows to a trickle just as it gets really cold. European natural gas storage is very low for this time of year. Also, some recently released Russian court documents show Russian troops are already in eastern Ukraine, even though Putin insists that they are not. And all this means bad news for global energy and food prices. You ready? Hit it. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jack Gamble, and I'm Nobody Special. The situation in Eastern Europe continues to get worse by the day. Today, we learned that the gas flow through one of Europe's most important pipelines has slowed to almost nothing, even as Europe is drawing down their natural gas stockpiles very quickly for this time of year, and it's getting very cold. Power prices in Europe are on the rise. We're already seeing the effects of these elevated power prices and natural gas prices in the fertilizer market, which could affect food prices next year. And it has everybody wondering, what is Vladimir Putin going to do next? And these documents that came out of the Russian courts this week said, whoops, the troops are already in eastern Ukraine, even though Putin insists that they're not. Now, before we get into the articles, folks, I have to ask, could you please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel. Don't forget that notification bell. It really helps me out. It helps me to keep this channel growing, and I'd be forever in your debt. And now it is that time to shrink my big fat melon of a head. And let's get into these articles. And this is today in Bloomberg. Russian gas flows to Europe set to remain capped as cold weather arrives. Auctions showed just a fraction of key pipeline space was booked, and lower flows would coincide with a forecast for colder weather. Russia's gas shipments through a major transit route to Germany are set to remain capped on Monday, potentially worsening Europe's energy crunch just as a cold snap arrives in the region. Just a fraction of the pipeline space was booked in auctions on Sunday to flow gas into Germany through Belarus and Poland, according to data from the regional booking platform. The booking signal supplies via the YAML Europe link could remain limited on Monday after plunging over the weekend. Reduced gas flows would exacerbate Europe's energy crunch, which has already prompted metal smelters and fertilizer producers to curb output. Fertilizer, put a pin in that. We'll circle back to that in a minute. If Russian gas giant Gazprom doesn't reserve extra capacity at numerous within-day auctions overnight, that will force Europe to withdraw even more gas from its already depleted storage sites. And this chart here, we'll zoom in a little bit on this, is showing the flow through that gas pipeline. And you can see up here all week around 250 or so gigawatt hours per day worth of natural gas flowing through that. And now we are down here in the single digits. So we are at just 3 or 4% capacity in this pipeline, right as demand for natural gas in Europe is set to explode because of this cold spell arriving. Only 4% of capacity was allocated to send the fuel through Germany's Malnau station, where Russia's Yamal Europe pipeline terminates. That compares with about 35% capacity that Russia has booked for most days this month. Russia has also opted against booking extra pipeline capacity to flow more gas through Ukraine on Monday. European temperatures are forecast to briefly dip below seasonal norms at the start of the week, putting further strain on Europe's storage sites that are just 60% full, a record low for this time of year. Now, just to put that in perspective, I want to reference some of the numbers in this article that was on Reuters that is mentioning by midday, flows through the Malnau metering point in the German-Polish border were down to an hourly volume of just 370,000 kilowatt hours per hour, falling from levels just over 4 million kilowatt hours per hour briefly seen during the day. And that's continuing to fall from Saturday levels when they fell sharply to around 1.2 million from an average of around 9 to 12 million kilowatt hours per hour seen in December. So the Russians are really putting the squeeze on the European gas market. There is just a small fraction, just 4% of pipeline capacity is being used right now. So all these questions about will Vladimir Putin start playing games with the natural gas flows into Europe? Well, it looks like he's already doing that, folks. It's not a matter of will he already did. He's already doing it. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, check out the power prices in Europe in this chart. This is the peak power prices in France right now at nearly 400 euros per megawatt hour. Now, just to put that in perspective for you folks in the States, what 400 euros per megawatt hour looks like, I just want to show you right here in the United States where I live. This is for Pico Energy, where I get my power, and right now it is trading at about $56 per megawatt hour. And they're trading for roughly around $425 per megawatt hour in Europe right now. So Europe is really getting pounded with these energy prices. And it's not just the tough flows of natural gas that are hurting Europe right now. Reading it from this article, this is in Bloomberg, dated today. European daily power prices surged as a swing to colder than normal temperatures is set to boost demand on Monday, while France halts more nuclear reactors. You see, France has had 4 nuclear units shut down in recent days because of equipment failures. And keep in mind, France is a major exporter of electric because France is one of the biggest nuclear countries in the world. They export a lot of electricity into Germany, Portugal, Spain, and the UK. And with those nuclear shutdowns, that means France will not be exporting as much electricity, even as the Russians slow their natural gas exports right as the cold arrives. So there is some serious struggle going on in European power markets right now. Now, moving on, I want to get to this article that I saw today, and this is on CBS News. A Russian court document mentioned Russian troops stationed in eastern Ukraine, even though Moscow insists there is none. And this article came out yesterday. A Russian court's verdict in a bribery case last month appears to have inadvertently referenced the presence of Russian troops in the rebel-held Donbass area of Ukraine. A district court in Russia's Rostov region on the Ukrainian border disclosed that the manager of a company called Technologia, pardon my pronunciation, was responsible for stocking and selling food to Russian troops stationed in eastern Ukraine. The court sentenced the manager to 5 years in prison on charges for transferring about $13,500 from his boss to a local government official, bribes, to curry favor with authorities and avoid disruptions in the supply chain. These rations were intended to be sent to military units of the Russian armed forces stationed on the territory of the DNR and LNR, which is referring to the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics in eastern Ukraine. After the document started spreading on Russian media, the page was quickly taken down from the court's website. CBS News has reviewed an archived digital copy of the verdict. The document was first spotted by a Ukraine watcher who posts under the Twitter handle of Necromancer. Moscow has repeatedly denied the presence of Russian soldiers in Donbass, where rebels have been fighting Ukrainian government forces since 2014. President Vladimir Putin's government insists that Russia is not part of the conflict, even though Russian court documents show that somebody was just sentenced to go to prison for embezzling funds that were meant to feed Russian troops in that exact part of the world. That's interesting. So there is a lot going on in Eastern Europe right now. Okay, we've already got, between cold weather and nuclear shutdowns and the global energy crisis that's going on right now, we've got majorly elevated energy and natural gas prices in Europe. This is already straining the global supply chain for fertilizer along with metals and other things. Now we've got the Russians are slowing down the flow of gas into Europe, which is exacerbating those problems. Now, the reason I mention all of this is because we have over 120,000 Russian troops are piled up along the Ukrainian border right now, just as these Russian court documents are showing they've already got troops in eastern Ukraine. So it looks like the Russian invasion of Ukraine could be imminent. And if that happens, that means the flows of natural gas to Europe could be cut off even further. And that also means it could make global food problems a lot worse, not just in the fertilizer market. Keep in mind that the Ukraine is the world's 9th largest wheat producer, 5th largest corn producer, 4th largest barley producer, and 8th largest soybean producer. So there is a lot of the world's food supply is grown in the Ukraine. If the Russian tanks start rolling across eastern Ukraine, that will have major implications for agriculture in the Ukraine next year, on top of what it means for energy and fertilizer prices. Now, we've been talking about this situation for a while here on this channel, and there's 2 ways that you could potentially invest this trend. Before I get into that, I have to see why my A here and say, folks, I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. Do your own research and your own DD and arrive at a decision that's right for you based on your unique situation. But I have invested this trend in 2 different ways, and it is time to shrink my melon of a head again. The first way I have invested this trend is in a company called Cheniere Energy, ticker symbol LNG, and I've talked about this one a couple of times on my channel. Cheniere Energy is a LNG or liquefied natural gas exporter. They buy cheap natural gas here in the States, they freeze it into a liquid, and then they load it onto boats and ship it into Europe where the price is much higher. So this is a way to harvest the arbitrage between cheap American natural gas and very expensive European natural gas. Now, I've been covering this one for a while. When I first started covering this one, it was in this pennant pattern here that I've drawn, and you'll notice we've broken down below that. I added to my position in this company at about $103.75, and we're right now just around $100. We're still above the 200-day moving average, but below the 50. So technically, this one doesn't look very good right now, but I do believe the macroeconomic story is definitely a tailwind for this company, especially if things in Eastern Europe continue to get worse. Now, I would also add that there was a story that broke last week that Schneider has asked FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to ask for more time to make a final investment decision on the expansion of one of their liquefaction facilities. And it looked like the market did not like that news. The market was hoping for a positive final investment decision. But supply chain disruptions, as well as other unfortunate news recently that I'm not allowed to talk about without getting censored, has prevented Schneider from making that final investment decision. Markets did not like that news, and it's traded down for a few days in a row. So technically, this one doesn't look really good right now, but again, the macroeconomic headwinds are very strong for this company, so I am still in this position. Now, another way that you could invest this trend of energy prices in Europe and what is potentially going on in Eastern Europe is through corn, and I've talked about that before. Ticker symbol CORN. This is an ETF that invests in corn futures, and here we had another pennant pattern that I drew. And we have since broken out of that pennant, and we are still trending upwards, and I believe corn is heading much higher. Now, the reason I zeroed in on corn instead of just a widespread food ETF is because of the effect of the energy prices on fertilizer. See, corn is a unique crop. It requires more fertilizer than a lot of similar crops. Corn cannot extract nitrogen from the air. Corn gets all of its nitrogen from the soil, which means it requires more fertilizer than most other crops. And my investment thesis has been one of two things will happen. Either a lot of corn farmers will plant less corn and more soybeans or wheat next year, or those who do plant corn will be tempted to use less fertilizer, which means crop yields could be going down. Either way, higher corn prices on the horizon as farmers' costs continue to increase. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, I found this article today, Managing Through Higher Costs of Corn and Soybean Production. Now, this is in Hoosier Ag Today, and I want to scroll down a little bit to these last few paragraphs here. Even with the higher costs, he encourages farmers not to write off planting a corn crop, rather create a budget for both corn and soybeans, and you might be pleasantly surprised that corn is very competitive in quite a few situations. And here we have this Purdue Extension economist is suggesting that farmers not be tempted to plant less corn and more soybeans. He wouldn't be saying that if there wasn't that temptation already to plant less corn. And I think maybe not farmers en masse make that decision, but I think enough farmers will make the decision to plant something other than corn next year that it will have a measurable impact on the total corn harvest next year. And on top of that, he also said this, as for fertilizer rates, don't just put on the same amount of fertilizer you put on in the last 5 years or so. When prices are higher, you need to try to reduce those rates a little bit if you can. So there's the other half of my thesis, that farmers who do plant corn will be tempted to put less fertilizer down on their corn, which means crop yields will be going down. So fewer acres of corn planted and fewer bushels per acre of corn produced. Either way, we're looking at higher corn prices. And that is on top of the whole global inflation narrative that isn't going away anytime soon. And lastly, I want to talk about this article that came out just this morning. Argentina caps corn and wheat exports in bid to tamp down prices. Now, Argentina is the world's fourth largest producer of corn and one of the biggest exporters of corn. The Argentine government on Friday capped the volume of corn and wheat for the 2021-22 cycle that can be exported in a bid to head off domestic grain shortages and tamp down rising food values in the country, which is battling high inflation. The government said that corn exports would be limited to 41.6 million tons, while wheat would be limited to 12.5 million tons. The South American country is the world's second largest corn exporter and a key global supplier of wheat. So what we have going on here is one of the world's biggest producers of corn and wheat is worried about rising food prices. And so they are cutting back their exports, limiting what they sell to other countries to increase the supply within their own country and fight the inflation in their own country. And we're starting to see this hoarding going on around the world. We saw China do something similar with fertilizer. China is not exporting fertilizer to the rest of the world to try to keep prices down within their own borders. We are slowly seeing a breakdown in globalism right now, folks. As these supply chain crises develop and as shortages develop, it's every man for himself in the global market. And the have countries are cutting off the flow into the have not countries. And here's a perfect example. Argentina is saying we are going to sell the world less food because we don't want our food prices to go up. So this is another indicator that higher corn prices are on the horizon. And again, if the situation in Ukraine kicks off, Ukraine being the world's fifth largest corn producer, and we see some disruption to the corn growing season in Ukraine because of fighting breaking out, well, that would just make this problem much worse, let alone the fact that the fertilizer prices will continue going up as the Russians cut off the flow of natural gas into Europe, because natural gas is the key ingredient in fertilizer production. So folks, long story short, the situation going on in Europe is really aggravating a lot of these pre-existing situations that are driving up energy and food prices worldwide right now. And the fact that the Russians just accidentally spilled the beans that their troops are already in eastern Ukraine would suggest an increased likelihood that the rest of the Russian army starts rolling into Ukraine any day now. And if you think Vladimir Putin is kidding, he's got 120,000 troops stacked up on that border, ready to roll as soon as he gives the order. And at the same time, he's already cutting off the flow into Europe, almost as a warning to Europe, don't get involved in this conflict. And Europe is running out of gas with their storage levels at just 60%. They cannot afford the Russian gas to stop flowing through that pipeline. And that's why I like both Cheniere Energy, ticker LNG, and the corn ETF as possible ways to invest the trend in higher energy and higher fertilizer and higher crop prices next year. Again, not a financial advisor, not financial advice. Guys, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to my channel. It's a big help to me, and I'd be forever in your debt. And until next time, live small and dream big.